Hello and welcome to another episode of the Rotoworld Baseball Show. I'm your host, Eric Samulski, joined, as always, by Scott Pianowski. Scott, we will have baseball games that count this week. We're getting close. We're getting close now.
Yeah, I'm getting excited. Just get back from Tout Wars. I still have drafts coming, man. I'm drafting all through March. I even have one league that may draft in April, and there's a second league I may set up in April. So remember, if you haven't drafted yet, you can draft in Yahoo into the season. And the friends and family draft, in fact, might be a draft into the season. But yeah, I'm getting excited. Obviously the Padres and Dodgers are getting ready to go, and then how can you not be excited about this Dodgers team? I mean, it's just so loaded, and Eric, we're going to talk today about risers and fallers, and I think spring training means something. I think this has been this cool. The cool kids think, oh, so I don't watch spring training. I don't care what happens. I had all the right answers a month ago. I don't agree with that. There's information coming out, and obviously you need to know about the injuries. Nobody would dispute that, but there's also performance stuff and jobs are. Here's the other thing. If teams care about what happens in spring training, if somebody's job is getting determined, or role is being determined by what happened over the last 3 or 4 weeks, I think we have to talk about that stuff.
Yeah, I think it doesn't matter obviously as much as like a week of regular season games, right? Like you're not looking at, the 12 games in spring training that somebody got in and putting the same amount of weight on there. But I think there are things that matter that can either just be things you put in the back of your head and they're like, okay, I'll look and see if this continues in the regular season. Or as you pointed out, there are certainly spots that are up for grabs when you come into spring training. And so in those instances, spring training 100% matters, right? People are trying to win a job. We saw it in a lot of instances, like, for example, Gerrit Cole, right, came into spring with a locked in. They said he's not platooning. He is the left fielder. And he didn't look good in spring. And a lot of the issues we've seen in the past surfaced again. And they signed Adam Duvall and they said Gerrit Cole is going to be a platoon bat now. That is a type of thing that can happen because of spring training, right? It's not necessarily like, okay, Kyle Tucker struggles in spring. Oh, I don't know if I can draft him now. We don't need to make those kind of leaps. But the guys who are on the fringes of the roster and the guys whose hold on starting jobs is a little bit more tenuous, it matters a little bit more there. And we're gonna get to risers and fallers, as you mentioned, guys who've caught our eye in the spring. Also, we're going to get to just some spring training news and notes. And we're going to get to the two things I put on the rundown. But since you mentioned winning jobs, I do want to jump to the thing that we have third, which is on that same Braves team. We now know who the fifth starter is. The Braves announced early today, Monday morning, that Reynaldo Lopez is the fifth starter. They sent down Bryce Elder and Huascar Ynoa. We've seen this before, right? Reynaldo Lopez has probably been on everybody's fantasy team at some point because, he had some promise as a starting pitcher for various teams and it hasn't quite, lived up to what we expected. But when a team like the Braves says, we're signing you as a starter and nobody believes it, and then they give him a starting spot in the rotation and he has looked good this spring, are you willing to gamble again on Reynaldo Lopez?
I'm certainly interested in Reynaldo Lopez, and also Gavin Stone looks like earned a rotation spot with the Dodgers. We would say in all spring, you get to draft Dodgers and you get to draft Braves thinking ostensibly about their offense, but you want pitchers, even in this era where everybody's throwing 5 or 6 innings, it feels like, and complete games are so rare and shutouts are rare and guys get taken out with no hitters. That's the world we live in. I still want a starting pitcher on a winning team. I still want a starting pitcher backed by a lineup that I feel like 5 or 6 runs is the most likely outcome. So yeah, I'm going to draft both of these guys. Got upgraded in my recent. I do ranking upgrades every day, and they both get a decent bump in my latest and greatest.
Yeah, I think these are the perfect end of draft 12-team league type of pitchers where you want to draft that upside. We've talked about it a bunch. And just see how the first couple weeks of the season go, see how the first couple starts go, and you can decide if you want to jettison them or not. Gavin Stone completely changed his pitch mix, which I'll be discussing in an article that comes out on Wednesday over on Rotoworld. So check that out if you are listening to this, and it's Wednesday. And then Reynaldo Lopez is just like the Braves he looked good, and the Braves gave him a shot. So you should give him a shot at the end of your drafts as well. There's been some less good news also today on Monday. Aaron Judge is still not hitting on the field. Today marks the second start he should have had, according to Aaron Boone's initial timeline. The Yankees first, when Judge swung and winced and came out of the game, the Yankees publicly said, "Oh, he was only supposed to get 2 at-bats, so that was planned." And then everybody showed the video of him wincing when he swung, and then they admitted he got hurt. When he got sent for an MRI, they said the MRI was on his abs, but a hitter doesn't get an MRI on their abs. They get an MRI on their oblique, but the Yankees have refused to use the word oblique. They said he was going to hit on the field Saturday and play in the game. He didn't. They said he was going to hit on the field Monday, today, and play in the game. He didn't. He is hitting off a tee. He is shagging fly balls in the outfield. So this is one of those questions, because Aaron Judge is one of those stars where we shouldn't really care about spring training. Are you starting to care about this at all?
I'm so floor driven with my early picks. And it's interesting. I pulled the last 5 days of NFBC ADP. This covers 71 drafts. It's a good way to take the temperature of how is the market reacting to this. Aaron Judge is down to 13th overall in ADP. He's no longer a first-round pick in a 12-round league, in a 12-team league. And yeah, I see Trey Turner over him. I agree with that. I see Juan Soto over him. I agree with that. You have to – no, I get it. Some people might say, well, if I draft Aaron Judge and I get 135 great games, I can live with that. I'll replace him for a month. Mm-hmm. But this just seems like something that's even last year, he was a monster when he was healthy. But then he missed it felt like 6-7 weeks, something like that. He wasn't maybe quite the same guy when he came back. I feel like you're inheriting 6 months of stress if you have Aaron Judge, because he's almost like a pitcher, Eric, where you watch your pitchers throw. I remember when I rostered DeGrom a few years ago, and I feel, as much as I love watching him pitch, every time he landed awkwardly, I got nervous.
Right.
And that's what Aaron Judge feels like to me. Every time he takes a swing and something doesn't look right, I'm not a doctor, but I'm going to play doctor from my couch, from my office, where I have my glorious multiple TVs and everything. I want to draft guys that enjoy them and watch them. And I feel like with Aaron Judge, as great as he is, you're signing up for stress. You're signing up for inevitable IL stints, and that's plural. Now, maybe the market's pushed him onto the first round, but even in the second round, I want to take somebody who I don't see a downside with. I don't see risk with, and I can't sign off on that. Aaron Judge will not be somebody I will draft in the second half of my draft season.
Yeah, and I had a decent amount of shares of Aaron Judge. I think to your point, the Yankees had already said that Judge was going to have to manage his toe injury as the year went on. Right. So you already have one injury that you knew you were going to be dealing with, which means if you look back at 2022 and you see 16 stolen bases, like, you're not getting that. Right. He's managing a toe injury means he's not going to run. Now you have an oblique injury for a guy who is 6'7" and like 280 pounds. Right. Like there's a lot that goes into the swings for him. That's a lot of strain. And so it's very clearly something that's not going to it has an impact on him. And, the early projections had him for like 650 plate appearances. They've now dropped down to 600. If all of a sudden you drop down to 570, like, that's still a lot of plate appearances, but it drastically impacts the stats that you're going to get from him. And so I am not like, he's not quote unquote off my board. I hate when people just quickly say, oh, he's off my board. Like, I will draft Aaron Judge at the right price, but it's probably not in the first 2 rounds of my draft. And I understand that is being conservative. Like, I fully get it. If I get 600 plate appearances of Aaron Judge, if he comes back and, manages the toe issue so he doesn't run, but this oblique doesn't pop up again, you're going to look back and say, man, I wish I drafted him in the second round. But you also, as you mentioned, like, you can't really miss on those first picks. And so there are just a lot of guys that, especially like, listen, if Judge isn't going to run, I mean, Pete Alonso, Aaron Judge, they get a little bit closer in terms of like elite power. I think the run production for Judge is a little better in the Yankees lineup. and obviously outfield eligibility helps because first base is deep. But that level of decision gets a little bit closer than it would have been 2 weeks ago.
I could never take Judge over Matt Olson right now. I could never take Judge over Jordan Alvarez right now, or Bryce Harper right now, probably even Austin Riley. And just to put a pin on this, the Yankees really screwed up not filling center field. Aaron Judge should not be their center fielder. And the only reason he is because they weren't able to find somebody who, not that Judge can't play center field, but the point is Aaron Judge's contribution to this team as an offensive player. He needs to be a corner outfielder and even somebody who could maybe DH some of the time. And I realize that will probably have to be Giancarlo Stanton for as long as he can stay hale. But it's a failure of the Yankees organization that they started this season with him ostensibly as their center fielder, because you don't want all that extra stress on him when he's playing defense.
Who can play center field is Trent Grisham. And so if you
liked him as a sleeper, and I can see that coming in.
If you're in like draft and hold formats, I think that like Trent Grisham, I am still in my last draft and hold in the 44th round, and Trent Grisham is on the board. So like those are picks where, if Judge were to get hurt, like that's going to be a lot of Trent Grisham in center field and, in Yankee Stadium. So that's something of interest to me.
By the way, speaking of New York outfielders who I like as late sleepers, just duck this in there. I've been taking a lot of Harrison Bader. I bet the Yankees wish they still had, by the way, because
he would certainly be great for them.
Yeah, plus defender. I know doesn't have the greatest hitting approach, and you'll watch Harrison Bader sometimes strike out on pitches nowhere near the strike zone. You're like, he'll drive you crazy. But at the end of the year, he's going to have like 15 home runs and 21 stolen bases or something.
Yeah,
like that.
And one of these years he might also stay healthy, but who knows? On the same team, very quickly, like I can't draft Gerrit Cole. Since we talked about the last injury update, we have heard that he's dealing with he's not getting PRP injections. He's just having rest and recovery, but he's dealing with nerve issues. It's going to be 3 to 4 weeks before he even picks up a ball to throw. He has nerve inflammation and edema in his right elbow. I just hear nerve inflammation. I hear not throwing for a month. And I understand that it's going to depress his draft price, but like he'd have to be going late enough where he's going in like the Kyle Bradish and Kodai Senga range of like guys who we know aren't coming back until June at the absolute earliest. And right now he's being taken still a little bit above that range. Honestly, like it wouldn't shock me if Max Scherzer pitched before Gerrit Cole. Jacob deGrom is already throwing. Like, would it shock me if deGrom pitched in a game this year before Cole does? Now, we don't know how many games deGrom will pitch after that. But what I mean is just like nerve inflammation is too risky for me. I can't do that with a starting pitcher.
When they talk rest and rehab on major pitching injuries, I'm just wondering if they're putting off surgery. Surgery is just inevitable and it's going to happen. And I'm not a doctor. It's not my elbow. It's not my shoulder. This just underscores, Eric, that there's no such thing as a safe pitcher, right? We want to believe it. And Cole has just been a horse for so many years. And Zach Wheeler's been a horse. And Strider's going to strike out more batters than everybody. They're so risky. We always talk about the comp between the running backs and the pitchers, the starting pitchers, fantasy football, fantasy baseball. If you have Christian McCaffrey the year he plays every game, he's a cheat code. Just like if Spencer Strider makes 35 starts, he's going to strike out 285 guys in an era where guys aren't even pitching that much, and 200 strikeouts sometimes seems like a pipe dream. That's a huge thing to have. If I knew Gerrit Cole, if you promised me Gerrit Cole was going to start a full season, I think he'd be a first-round pick.
Yeah,
obviously that's way off the board now. I can't draft him, man. I hate saying it. It's no fun when the best players don't play, but I'm not going to play this waiting game. And the other thing too is when they come back, say Gerrit Cole comes back in July or August, there's no guarantee he's Gerrit Cole right away.
Right, exactly.
He hasn't pitched for several months, and they may be a couple of some short starts. Maybe they put him on a really limited pitch count. At this point, they're thinking, we need this guy for the playoffs.
And you have to think about like when you're dealing with nerves, right? Nerves in your elbow, that has ramifications down towards your fingers and your grip. So there's no, again, like to your point, there's no guarantee that he's going to immediately have the same feel and command over his pitches that he did before. Now, he'll get it back, right? Nobody's saying this is like the end for Gerrit Cole, but it might take a little while before that command and that grip gets back to what we're used to for him. And so that does create another little bit of risk there. I see even more risk in like, listen, at least we know what's happening with Gerrit Cole. It is now Monday afternoon. 2 days ago, Eury Perez, the Marlins starter, was going to seek advice from a surgeon on what to do about his elbow because he had been experiencing elbow pain. It has now been 2 days and we haven't heard anything. I can't draft him until I hear any piece of information. I just see a young pitcher who was dealing with fingernail issues and then may have, who knows, again, we're not doctors, but may have compensated for that in a way with gripping the baseball differently or releasing it differently that led to elbow pain. But I see a young pitcher who went to get a surgeon's opinion on his elbow, and we have no information since then. I just think it's too risky. Like maybe if you're in a 12-team league and somehow it's not going to happen, but somehow he's available in like the last couple rounds of your draft where you would pick a pitcher who you would be happy to release in the first week of the season if the start doesn't go well, right? Like a Reynaldo Lopez. Like if I'm in that range, sure, I might say, you know what? I have 7 pitchers I really like, and so I will take Eury Perez. And if I have to cut him in week 1, I'll cut him. But I can't see another situation where I can draft Eury Perez.
I totally agree. And you know, this is kind of what, like, I'm becoming such a Logan Webb fan because he throws, any pitcher can get hurt. It's an unnatural act. We don't know who the next guy is going to be. But I look at somebody like Logan Webb who throws in the low 90s, not the high 90s. His game is control. He contributes strikeouts, but he gets them mostly because of volume. I feel, maybe I'm, Eric, if you think I'm crazy, tell me. Maybe I'm just trying to find some safety and security at a position where it doesn't exist. But I feel like those types of players, like, for example, again, with this, and I know this isn't a fantasy football podcast, but when I'm drafting my running backs, I love it when they catch a lot of passes because you're getting tackled by the safeties and the defensive backs. You're not getting tackled by the middle of the line, you know, and the 320-pound guy isn't tackling you. I feel like that is less of a strain on a running back when he's catching a lot of passes, and maybe that's helped Christian McCaffrey more often than not every season, stay healthy. So I'm talking myself into Logan Webb being safer, maybe a little bit safer, and who knows? Maybe I'm kidding myself. And there are people out there doing, you know, there are people who out there who, I mean, you pitch college baseball, for crying out loud. There are people out there who understand the art of pitching, the science of pitching, the physics of pitching more than I do. But when guys are maxing out and throwing all those sliders and stuff, it just makes me a little nervous. And again, if I'm searching for something that doesn't exist, a safety, a way to sleep at night, and I'm just tricking myself, you can tell me. And if any of the listeners want to tweet at me and tell me, or exit me, or whatever we call Twitter now, I'm all here for it, because we know you want to win your fantasy league, Eric, you got to get the pitching right. And it's just, this has been, to me, if somebody said to me, I'm going to actually punctuate this point in a second, let you talk. If somebody said to me, what's been the story of spring training other than maybe Wyatt Langford, I'd said all the pitcher injuries.
Right. Yeah, there have been tons, and we've covered so many of them on this podcast. I think you are right and wrong in what you're saying. Like, I don't think there is any security, but I do think we have enough research. And, Eno Saris just put an article out last week that had to do with pitcher injuries that, has remained that velocity is kind of like the number one indicator, or the number one precursor to elbow strain, right? To arm injuries. So I do think it makes sense that guys who are quote unquote soft tossers are perhaps a little bit less risky, but I just think the nature of throwing a baseball is risky regardless. And so you might be taking a little bit of less risk, but you're still taking tons of risk. It's the nature of the position. And that's like one of those reasons why I was drafting Tyler Glasnow early, in my top 10, 12 starters, is like, I think, yeah, he's risky, but so is everybody. So that was kind of my aspect of it. We don't want to only talk about pitcher injuries. We have 2 outfield injuries to wrap this up. Over the weekend, we heard that Josh Lowe was going to start the year on the IL with an oblique injury. He had been battling a hip injury and was set to come back from the hip injury, and now he has an oblique injury, which is funny because his brother Nate Lowe on Texas also has an oblique injury, and they both will start the year on the IL. And then TJ Friedl, who's the starting center fielder for the Reds, tried to make a diving catch and fractured his wrist, and so he'll be out for a couple of months as well. When you hear Josh Lowe and TJ Friedl starting the year on the IL, did you have shares with a guy like Lowe, who's just going to be a delayed start? Are you willing to still take shares? What does this do to your draft strategy?
It makes me wish I had more Will Benson. That's one thing. A guy who I couldn't pull the trigger on because Cincinnati, isn't funny how glutted their roster was, and then there's a suspension, and then there's an injury, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, I guess everybody's going to play just fine, other than the other two guys who are out of the equation. But I don't like to draft into injuries and then have to be the optimist on when they come back. At least with hitters, I'm more confident when they come back. They may find their form better than the pitchers do or quicker than the pitchers do. But it's generally speaking, you talked about like you would still draft Judge. It's just a matter of getting your price. With the case of Lowe, either of the Lows really, the market has to give me a really nice coupon before I would make the plunge in one of my later drafts.
Yeah, I agree. I already think like Josh Lowe, who I really like, had some platoon issues in Tampa. Some possibility of sitting versus lefties, a very real possibility. If he now starts the year out, like, does he get 500 plate appearances? That's a question that will depress the price, even regardless of how good he is overall. TJ Friedl was somebody that I did like because I think he was set to get every day at bats as a good defensive center fielder in Cincinnati, and he's got enough power and some speed. I actually had been taking a lot of shares of Jake Fraley because on Twitter, Mike Curland, who runs MLB Playing Time, went back and looked at games in which Fraley and Benson were both healthy, and the Reds against right-handed pitching played Fraley way more often than Benson. So I thought, okay, maybe Fraley has a leg up on Benson. Now I think Fraley is the starting center fielder for the Reds. Or, I mean, Fraley and Benson are both getting lots of at-bats. But I think that Fraley is somebody who, he may get hurt too. He's got a long injury history. But I think he also has power and speed, and he's going at a real bargain in drafts. I think Jonathan India sees more plate appearances since he's going to bounce around, and the DH spot is now a little bit more open than it would have been before. Jonathan India is still going really late in drafts. And so, listen, if he's a guy who then becomes second base outfield eligible, like that becomes a little bit interesting for him. And then another guy like in deeper leagues, because again, we know the Rays will platoon, but Richie Palacios, the Rays brought Richie Palacios over. He is a left-handed hitter. He can play the outfield well. Like, he is a good defensive outfielder. He has done the Rays thing in the spring where he's pulling and lifting the ball a lot more than, he was prior to coming to Tampa. There's enough power in that bat where, like, if you're in a 15-team league or if you're in one of these draft and hold type leagues, like, Richie Palacios is a guy where I think he's interesting. I don't think he gets enough at bats to be like 12-team relevant. But I think he is a name to watch, and then probably going to get more outfield time for, Ahmed Rosario, who was already looking pretty good this spring. And so he's another guy with like second base, shortstop, outfield eligibility he could pick up. That's, valuable at the end of drafts as well.
And the Rays drive me crazy with their, I know it's smart to platoon, but it feels like they want a different lineup every day. And that can be kind of death in a 12-teamer. You can live with it more in a 15-teamer if you're in a league that has multiple transaction periods during the week and you can work the schedule and the handedness of the opponents. Let me just backtrack to Cincinnati for a second, because we talked a lot about them with all of our run-ups with the positional previews, and please go back and listen to them. We just had that great the Rotoworld mock show that we did that you can stream now, you can watch now, which has a ton of content in it. And the Reds, what do you do with Ellie? What do you do with all these young players, all these moving parts? Now there's a couple people out of the lineup. I think this is a very critical team to get right. I'm curious who you've drafted the most of their guys this year, and is there somebody you've been fading? Just give me like a final word on the Cincinnati Reds for 24.
So I had been drafting a lot of Heimer Candelario early because he was the only one that they had said was like an everyday player, and so that remained for me because I think that now he's clearly an everyday player at third base with first base, third base. Sorry, mainly first, but with Noelvi Marte down too. And Christian Encarnacion Strand, now I'm drafting more because if Heimer's playing third, then Christian Encarnacion Strand is playing first. I am still not drafting Ellie De La Cruz in the second round. It wasn't playing time concerns for me. It's just, again, like, the risk aspect of like the batting average that you had mentioned, beginning, like not being able to really take a 4 to second round risk. And then again, I mentioned, Fraley as an outfielder for me. I will say that in more recent drafts, I have found myself interested in Jonathan India as a late, like middle infield target, because I think he's going to get more playing time now. And with the eligibility that he's likely to pick up, I think he could be an interesting target.
I mean, I look at the projections for this lineup. I mean, you could have a bunch of double guys with the power and speed. They're going to run aggressively. We know the home park is a place we want to invest in. So for me, I've been out on Ellie just because the price has never come down that much. It's just too much swing and miss in his game. He hit under 200 in the second half. Although right now he might start the season batting second. I've tried to get Spencer Steer. The market really likes him. Mm-hmm. And I like your play of Candelario, because the important thing to remember with him, because when he got paid, and a lot of people are like, what are they doing? All this money for Candelario. He's not that good. And they have all this young talent. He'll be like the oldest guy in the lineup. All that matters is two things. One, he's a bona fide major leaguer. It's not like he's a bad hitter. And they're paying him starter money. So they like him. And they're right now probably going to bat him fifth to start the season. So maybe he's even more valuable in fantasy than he is in real life. Well, that's fine. Steer into that skid.
And some of the Candelario is somebody where, like, listen, I try not to think that I'm smarter than projections all the time, because I think historically speaking, that doesn't work out super well for you, especially from the hitting standpoint. Pitching projections are kind of all over the place. But I just don't see how Heimer Candelario hits 22 home runs last year between Washington and the Cubs, and projections have him for like anywhere between 20 and 22 home runs. Like, so you're basically saying there's no power boost to going to Great American Ballpark. I don't believe that to be the case, especially when you look at, like, he pulled the ball 6% more last year than he did the year before. He lifted the ball more last year than he did the year before. Like, these are things that got him to that power. And I'm not saying he's going to hit 30 home runs, but I think 25, 26 feels easier for me to envision than 20 to 22. And even just that little tweak, if you're doing projections, does jump him up like a couple of rounds, when you're talking about guys going like outside of the top 200. And again, first base and third base eligible is, that's a really nice corner infield target. You can jump around. So I really like that.
And if you want to drink for free, go to your local bar and ask them who led the major leagues in doubles in 2021 and give them like 15 guesses, because they're never getting Candelario. Who's the right answer?
Boom. Heimer Candelario, everybody.
There you go.
Scott and I are going to tell you some guys who are rising up our mental rankings and our real rankings after their spring training. But before we do that, we're closing in on opening day, and it's never too late to squeeze in another draft. So for those cramming before the regular season begins, grab your Rotoworld Baseball Draft Guide. It's loaded with comprehensive positional rankings, projections, and player profiles to ensure your draft is a success. Visit NBCsports.com/draft guide and use code baseball24 to get 10% off at checkout. That's NBCsports.com/draft guide and use code baseball24 to get 10% off at checkout. I myself still have like three or four drafts left to go. My home week draft is tonight. We've got another NFBC online championship coming up. So we've got plenty of guys to talk about, plenty of drafts still to do. Scott and I are going to do these a little bit as like quick hitters, because we kind of want to give you as many names to consider as possible. We're just going to go back and forth talking about some guys who have kind of caught our eye in the spring, and then some guys we're concerned about in the spring, and just give you some of our reasoning And maybe, you can take that or leave it for yourself. The first one for me that has caught my eye, has probably caught everybody's eye. It's AJ Puck. When the spring started, the Marlins said they were going to try to move AJ Puck into the rotation, and it just seemed like there's no way AJ Puck is getting into this rotation with, guys like Braxton Garrett and, Eury Perez and Trevor Rogers and whatever. And the Marlins have dealt with so many injuries, and Puck has looked so good that he is now locked into a rotation spot. Through 8 1/3 innings in the spring, he's allowed 6 hits, no runs, 15 strikeouts to just 4 walks. And the two key things that put me on to AJ Puck were, first of all, the strikeout to walk ratio. I think the command has been really good. And for me, also seeing the changes to his pitch mix. He now is throwing 2 variations of his slider. He was throwing kind of like a sweeper last year. He has also added in like a harder slider that's kind of like a cutter, which I think is really important for a lefty when facing a lot of righty hitters if he's trying to work through multiple innings. If you can get a hard cutter in on the hands of right-handed batters, it can help to mitigate some of that hard contact. We know he throws hard from the left side. He's got that good sweeper. I think there is now with the changeup to mix in, I think there's now a deep enough pitch mix to get him through 5 or 6 innings. And then the other thing I want to point out, like I've mentioned this a few times, people look at like, oh, he threw 66 innings in 2022. He only threw 57 innings last year, so he's not going to throw much more than 100. That would be true if he was a starting pitcher. We need to look at relief pitchers going into the starting rotation very differently, because he made 58 appearances last year. So he was pitching multiple games each week. So that amount of up and down, that strain on your arm when you're pitching every other day or back-to-back days, that strain on your arm is actually equal. And I'm working on an article right now to try to actually give data behind this, but that strain is equal to throwing more innings, right? A starting pitcher throws 140 innings because they throw 6 and then they don't throw again for 5 days. They allow their arm to rest. They allow their arm to recover. A reliever is throwing 100% usually, like 2 or 3 times a week. So that the strain of him throwing 130 innings this year is not going to be that much different than throwing 66 innings out of the bullpen over 60 appearances. So I really do think like you need to pencil Puck in if he stays healthy, and that's always been the question mark for him. But you need to pencil him in for like 130, 140 innings as like a projection. And I think he's going to give really solid totals there. And so I really like him as one of my later round picks in drafts. And he's even going like a little bit higher now, but still like not really that far inside the top 300. And I still love grabbing him where he's going.
For sure. So do I. I mean, at the time where Puck's going, even with that raise that in ADP of late, you're just trying to tell yourself an upside story. This is a guy, 6th overall pick in his draft class. I know that was a while ago, but there's been a pedigree here. Walks and strikeouts are still the purest stat that there is for both pitchers and hitters. Well, I feel a little bit better if the quality of opposition was better. On Baseball Reference, you can look at spring stats, and they have a metric that tells the average hitter that he's facing. And I think for Puck, it's 7.5, which means somewhere between around AA, maybe high AA, lower AAA. So I'd like that to be a little bit higher, but bottom line is he's always had great stuff. As you talked about, he's working towards trying to mitigate the platoon advantage with changing his pitch mix. And isn't it interesting this year, right? Normally we're always talking about starters who are going to be relievers now. And this year we have Puck. We have Michael King, who's going to be a full-time starter this year. Jordan Hicks is another experiment reliever to starter. So there's more guys going the other way. And if you play in head-to-head, I know we don't always have time to talk about the head-to-head format, but one of the cheat codes, a lot of times starting pitching is super important in some of the head-to-head leagues I play in, but you have to fill relief pitcher stats, relief pitcher slots. If you can get a relief pitcher eligible guy who's a starting pitcher, sometimes the way your matchup may fall in a certain week, that's a huge thing to have. So Puck will qualify relief pitcher to start the year eventually as a starter in Yahoo and in all other formats. So he could be a cheat code for there as well. No guarantee it works out, but everybody who you're going to pick around him is going to be a wild card or a lottery ticket anyway.
Really nice. Yeah. Who do you got as one of your first risers?
So we know that the Dodgers stole the show this year with their free agent additions, but the Cubs added a Japanese pitcher, Shota Imanaga. Older, he's 30, he's lefty, throws from kind of a different slot. And I talked about walks and strikeouts being like the first thing I'm always going to look at. And he's got 2 walks, 19 strikeouts, and his quality of opposition is a little bit higher than what Puck has right now. I'm not putting Puck down by any means. These guys drafted in different pockets anyway. But I think Imanaga is going to be, he's kind of like a FOMO pick for me right now. I haven't taken him yet. Like you, I still have several drafts coming. And I'm going to make sure I get at least one share. I have a lot of other Cubs. I have a lot of Cody Bellinger. I know he's a fascinating guy. We talked about in earlier episodes because he changes his approach with 2 strikes. And I think you could see almost anything you want with Bellinger's season last year. A lot of smart people think it's repeatable. A lot of smart people think maybe he's a risky guy. I happen to believe the pro side of that, but I have a lot of Cubs investments in different players. And I think I need some Imanaga to balance that out. So he's going to be a FOMO pick for me in the last couple of drafts I have, in part because of the 2 walks and the 19 strikeouts.
Yeah, I have a lot of shares of Imanaga so far. I'm fully in. I love what I've seen this spring, even though like the ERA is high. I don't really care. I love what I've seen.
Don't care. Do not care.
The Cubs. I'll stick with the Cubs real quick. We'll go to a hitter, but I really liked what I saw from Seiya Suzuki. I wanted to make sure we're not just talking about like young guys and pitchers. I just think Seiya Suzuki, like we know he's battled injuries his first 2 years coming over. He got a little bit of a late start last year with an oblique injury and didn't really hit the ground running until the second half. And I'm just not sure the ADP we're fully baking in what a healthy full season of Suzuki would look like. And maybe he's, we only have 2 years. Maybe he's not going to be a healthy guy. I don't necessarily think that's the case. He has, noticeably like leaned out a little bit this year to try to get a little bit less bulky and mitigate those risks with the oblique. He's crushing the ball in the spring. What I also like is he's running in the spring. He stole 9 bases in 2022. So there was a thought that he might steal more last year, and he stole only 6. And that could have been because of injury. I think there's a chance he gets you double-digit stolen bases, that he could be like a 25 homer, 10 steal guy, while hitting 270, 280 in the middle of that lineup. And so he's caught my eye because he looks healthy, looks good, and is hitting well. And I just think there's still maybe a little bit of value to be had from him.
So I was on the Baseball HQ podcast, the great Patrick Davitt podcast a few weeks ago, and I posited that Suzuki was a boring value vet. And Patrick Davitt had a chuckle about that. He's like, well, he's in his 3rd season. It's like, well, right. But he's no longer the new Japanese import. He's had time to acclimate to the pace of the game. The ball's different. The culture is obviously different. And he's batting, Eric, when I first started playing fantasy baseball, I wanted all the guys who hit 3rd. And number 2 is kind of the new number 3, where it's like a lot of teams put their best hitter in that 2 slot, and you're not hitting leadoff, so it's not a terrible spot for RBIs, but you're going to cycle through the lineup a lot to get the extra volume. I want to win runs scored anyway in 5x5 leagues. Sure. I want guys who hit 1st, 2nd, 3rd, but when I see Suzuki hitting 2nd, and not because he could easily bat 5th in this lineup, but he's batting, maybe Swanson could hit 2nd, and I don't dislike Dansby Swanson, but I love Seiya Suzuki now that he's not even the most buzzy Japanese player on his own team, because they've added somebody else. There's a shiny new toy there. I think I love anytime a player is good and has a track record, but is no longer hotly coveted among my opponents. I love players like that. Sign me up.
Got to do it. What about you? Who's your second guy?
Well, this is playing the hits, low hanging fruit, but Wyatt Langford, he's got to be the biggest ADP riser, right? I mean, he's just toying with baseball. We don't know. Before the season, we didn't know if he'd make the team, and now it looks like he's going to be batting in the middle of the lineup, get the high uniform number. Now it's a question of, Eric, how do you make money on Wyatt Langford? How do you profit on this guy? Because everybody, again, I talked about loving boring old vets. This is the opposite. This is the shiny new toy. This is probably the rookie of the year favorite now, but man, you can't watch this guy and not be impressed. He looks like maybe he could go 25-90 right out of the box. Am I underselling it? I mean, how are you playing this? Because I think you have to have a stance on Langford. Generally speaking, when somebody rises this meteorically, I usually am out. But maybe I have to find one FOMO pick just so if he is great right away, I'm not missing out on it.
I'm out. And it's just because he's now going like near the top 80 in drafts. I just can't do that. I know it's not about his talent. I think his talent is evident. They asked the Rangers GM this weekend about Langford, and he wouldn't commit to Langford being on the opening day roster. And he said he's done everything he can do to win a spot. And like, maybe I'm reading into that, but that feels a little cryptic. He's done everything he can do. But did he do it or not? And we talked about this before, and just like, there's a crowded outfield there. I don't think they're going to bench Leody Taveras right at the start of the season. They may bench him if he struggles in the first month of the year, but they need his defense in center field. Yes, Adolis Garcia could DH. Does Adolis Garcia want to DH? Because he's one of the stars of your team. And if he doesn't want to do that, you then as an organization have to decide if you want to force him to do that. Who knows how that goes over. Now, he may want to, and then it's a moot point. We don't know. We're not privy to the inner workings of those discussions. And so it wouldn't surprise me if Langford didn't make the camp, and it has nothing, or the opening day roster out of camp, and has nothing to do with his ability. It's just like, for example, one of the guys I really liked this spring was Coby Mayo. He looks great for Baltimore. A Baltimore beat writer put out a really good article this morning that's like, if Jackson Holliday makes the team, Coby Mayo is probably not going to make the team. And the reason for that is about the other major league guys and options. And options are so important when you're thinking about who makes a team, right? So if Jackson Holliday makes the team, you then have 2 roster spots for a bet on the bench for some combination of Coby Mayo, Jorge Mateo, and Ryan McKenna. And now you may say, well, Coby Mayo is better than both those guys. He should make the team. Sure. Jorge Mateo and Ryan McKenna have no options. So if the Orioles don't want to keep them on the opening day roster, they have to release them. Somebody else can claim them. They have to put them on waivers. Mateo can play the outfield. He can play shortstop. He's a great stolen base asset off the bench. McKenna can play all 3 outfield spots defensively. He's also a good defender. He can also run. Teams have to make those decisions. And when you're putting a young prospect who you like on the team, it's not always just, oh, well, then that veteran goes to the minors. It's, we lose that guy point blank. He's gone. And some teams value that depth within the organization, and they say, starting this guy off in the minors for a month, if it keeps me able to have this kind of depth that I really like, then I'd rather have that to start the year, because we don't know what's going to happen with injuries, and we don't know how people are going to look right off the bat. Or maybe another team has an injury, and then I don't have to lose Jorge Mateo. I could trade Jorge Mateo, and then I get something in return. And now I can call up Coby Mayo without costing myself a roster spot. So there are those sort of things that I think, especially when we play fantasy baseball, we don't keep in mind that real baseball aspect of it. That can sometimes lead to frustration when we see somebody we like not make the team.
So let's talk opportunity cost. I'm looking at the NFBC data from the last 5 days, 71 drafts. And Wyatt Langford is going 88 ADP. It's 84th on the list. So he's going in the mid-80s. Who are you missing out if you're taking Wyatt Langford? Brian Reynolds, boring value vet. Alex Bregman, boring value vet. Tristan Casas, player ascending, but he's already got a job and he's already performed at the major league level. Christian Walker, I would say he's another boring value vet. So you're giving up. We know Brian Reynolds is good and has a job. We know Alex Bregman is surrounded by that great Houston lineup. And again, he's not an MVP candidate anymore, but I think he's maybe the centerpiece of my Ibanez All-Stars, those boring value guys. Christian Walker's one of those guys. And if you say, well, no, I like younger players. I want guys who are on the escalator. Well, what's wrong with Tristan Casas, who I think everybody thinks good things about? When the cost of getting Langford, of being on the shiny new toy, and I realized I was talking earlier about maybe having one FOMO pick, but I guess I didn't realize what I'd have to give up to take him. These guys are all sure things. I mean,
isn't that like 20 picks ahead of Seiya Suzuki right now too?
Yes, Suzuki's around later. And
right. So
she's another boring value vet. He's not, whatever. Get the big contract. He's not in Fenway anymore. He's going to go 2015. He's a round or two later. Spencer Steer's a couple rounds later. Part of that Cincinnati offense we're talking about. Nolan Arenado, future Hall of Famer, but he's boring now. I know Rotoworld with St. Louis West. I drafted Nolan Arenado this weekend. I would do it again. And again, Eric, if you say, no, I want the younger players. I want the younger stars. Well, Evan Carter is going 2 rounds later than Wyatt Langford. That to me is wrong.
Yeah. And even if it's not wrong, it's like, okay, then I could take Bregman and a starting pitcher and then get Evan Carter. I mean, I think, we talked about, like, obviously with guys like Fraley and, like, there are outfielders later in particular. And again, I want to make this clear. I am not saying that I would take Ceddanne Rafaela over Wyatt Langford, but you have another rookie who is also a top prospect, right? Not at the level that Langford is, but this isn't somebody who came out of nowhere. This is a top 100 prospect who has come out in spring training. We knew he was a speed guy. He has 3 home runs already in spring training. He has 4 walks in spring training, which is more walks than he took in his debut with the Red Sox over, I think it was 28 games last year. So we're showing increased plate discipline. The Red Sox have said now that they may play him at second base to offset the loss of Vaughn Grissom at the beginning of the season. They're willing to maybe play him at shortstop because he came up as an infielder to give Trevor Story some off days. So there's a chance Ceddanne Rafaela is an everyday player for the Red Sox who could be second base outfield eligible, maybe shortstop. If you're in a format like Yahoo where you don't need 15 games, maybe he gets shortstop eligibility. And he right now is still going outside of the top 300 picks. Again, this is not my point of saying I would take Rafael over Langford. It's my point of just saying Rafael is another guy on my list who has really impressed me in the spring, just with the power and the plate discipline. And I just think that there are interesting outfielders that, again, are not as good as Wyatt Langford. But if I feel good about the outfielders I got early on, maybe I got an outfielder in the first round or the 5th round or, whatever, something like that, where I don't need outfield, I'm okay just passing on Wyatt Langford, getting Seiya Suzuki a round or 2 later, getting Evan Carter 2 rounds later, getting, a guy like Ian Happ probably like 4 rounds later.
Oh, ultimate boring value vet.
And just filling and getting because I know I can fill out the outfield that way.
So remember 12 months ago, who was Wyatt Langford 12 months ago? The hot prospect who's ahead of schedule, who everybody wanted. It was Jordan Walker. He's going 28 picks after Wyatt Langford. And we've already seen Jordan Walker show that he can play in the major leagues. He wasn't the monster that we were hoping for right away, but I mean, he acquitted himself fine. He was 21 years old. Now that that Jordan Walker isn't the shiny new toy anymore, you can get him 28 picks later after Wyatt Langford. That's just how the market works. You have to leverage that market.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I will end my risers with 2 pitchers on the same team. It's Reese Olson and Matt Manning. The Tigers, obviously, I think the Tigers are slowly becoming an organization that I'm trusting more with pitching development than I had in the past. Skubal has obviously taken massive steps forward. And then Olson and Matt Manning have come to spring training looking different. Also, like Casey Mize. Let's throw Casey Mize on this. So Reese Olson, Matt Manning, Casey Mize are all guys who I am way more in on now than I was before. All of them are a little bit up in velocity on their fastballs. All of them have more induced vertical break on their fastballs, which means more quote unquote rise, right? We know fastballs don't actually rise, but what it means is as they are approaching the plate, they are sinking less than a normal fastball, which makes it seem like it rises. So when you throw those types of fastballs up in the zone, they become harder to hit. These guys have all tweaked their pitch mixes in ways that are interesting to me. And I think that Mize may start the year in the minors or on the IL because he missed all of last year with an arm injury, and the Tigers are going to want to space out his innings. So I think Reese Olson and Matt Manning are going to make the rotation. I think they have both looked really good in the spring. Reese Olson is somebody whose slider is just gross. It's nasty. He's got a really good changeup. The fastball isn't great, but I think if he uses the four-seam fastball in a smart way, it will be fine enough. And so these are guys that like I love taking even in a 12 team. Like they're like kind of in my 50 to 60 range overall in my starting pitchers. So like if I get them as my SP6 or bench stashes, I just love getting these type of guys. And I think they're really valuable in a 15 team format as well, where obviously you're going to have to roster more pitchers. So I'm in on all three, but I think Olson and Manning have rotation spots in Detroit. So I'm definitely getting them. And then listen, like Jack Flaherty has not been super consistent. Kenta Maeda has, some checkered health issues in the past. So it's possible all three of these guys are in the rotation, by May.
The 24 Tigers are the 2022 Detroit Lions, the team that didn't make the playoffs. They're on the way up. They're going to be a pain in the neck to play. Maybe they arrive a year ahead of schedule because really only Minnesota looks like a good team. Everybody else is rebuilding, has all sorts of problems. White Sox have all sorts of problems. The Royals have Bobby Witt and a lot of question marks. I wish Cleveland called themselves the Spiders. I hate their lineup. Their pitching is interesting, but it's still, I don't know what Cleveland is right now. I think they're going to win 77 games. Detroit could steal this division. Now, I've been more primarily interested in their offense. Riley Green is one of my favorite players. Carpenter's a player I want to draft. Colt Keith looks like he's going to break camp with the team. He's a really interesting prospect, but I think you're really smart to invest in some of their pitchers inexpensively. I'll just give you a couple more risers on my list. I know Jake Cronenworth is extremely boring, but he might open the year hitting third for the Padres. Multiple position eligibility. He has more walks and strikeouts in the spring, which I always feel good about. Milwaukee needs a closer with Williams out for a while. I think Joel Payamps is eventually going to be that guy. So I've been drafting him as if he's going to get 10 to 12 saves, which would be a win for me. Victor Scott, 4 walks, 4 strikeouts, 4 steals. He may have a starting job. Waiting for him being the season. And even though Kutter Crawford's been my Red Sox pitcher du jour, Garrett Whitlock with 2 walks and 16 strikeouts has made his way to my watch list as well. And I've drafted him in some deeper leagues.
We're going to move to fallers, but I do just want to, we got a bevy of news just now, Monday from the Twins, breaking news. 2 things that I think are really important.
Don't even tell me Buxton got hurt.
Well, Buxton was actually scratched with a back injury.
Of course he was.
A back tightness.
Yeah.
But 2 things. First, Anthony DeSclafani has a forearm strain and will open the season on the IL, which likely means Louis Varland is now going to be the 5th starter on the Minnesota Twins. Louis Varland was a much hyped pitching prospect. Everybody loves Louis Varland, but it looked like he wasn't going to have a spot in the rotation. It looks like he will now. And also, Johan Duran will open the year on the IL with an oblique strain, and that takes off one of the top closers on the market. He is somebody who was going second in some drafts as a closer, and so now he is off the market there.
What a horrible spring for big closer.
It's been terrible. It looks like Griffin Jacks, maybe. Again, that's a situation to monitor, but it looks like Griffin Jacks is somebody who could start the year as the closer for the Twins. So something to think about there as well. Before we get to our fallers, I do just want to remind everybody, as Scott pointed out before, the Rotoworld mock draft episode is available on our YouTube channel. It's also available on our podcast feed as well. You can get our podcast on Spotify. You can get our podcast on Amazon Music, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts from. You can check it out there. You can check out the video on YouTube, where I break down the draft with Ahmed Fareed, who was our host for the mock draft. We went through all the picks. All the drafters come on. They talk about all the picks with us. We talk about draft strategy. We talk about some of our, the consensus on these picks, what to do, how to use ADP, all these sort of things. So it is a really great episode just in terms of seeing how some industry analysts draft, and also how we approach drafts and how we change our strategy in the middle of drafts. So make sure you check that out wherever you get your podcast, and also on YouTube. So Scott, we'll go quick with the concerns. Obviously, anybody who was injured, we have concerns about. I don't think it is relevant to talk about like Kyle Bradish and Kodai Senga and things like that. We know we're concerned. You and I both put Jarred Kelenic on our lists. We talked about that a little bit at the top of the show, why we're concerned about Jarred Kelenic and how he's no longer a full-time player. I have some concern over Carlos Rodon. He has not looked good this spring. I understand. To me, it's not even so much about like the velocity early in spring training wasn't good. I think, again, pitchers ramp up. And so, his velocity at some point isn't going to improve. He's not really getting a lot of whiffs. His stuff doesn't look really as sharp as it used to. A guy like that is not getting the swing and miss that I would like to see. I understand that he has 9 strikeouts. As you mentioned, if you go to Baseball Reference and look at his opponent's quality, he's faced the equivalent of AA hitters. So 9 strikeouts in 10 innings is not something that like jumps off the page. When I watch him, he doesn't look like the Carlos Rodon I saw a few years ago that looked, dominant. I'm not saying don't draft him, but I'm just saying I don't know that. I'm not convinced that he's going to bounce back in the way I was hoping that he would bounce back if we just said, you know what, last year was a rough year. He battled injuries. We're just going to write off last year and assume he goes back to like the White Sox Giants version of Carlos Rodon. I'm not willing to give him that yet. I think he might still be a useful pitcher for you, but it wouldn't surprise me if his ERA was in the mid to high 3s with the way he's looking right now, not somebody who was pushing for a sub-3 ERA when he was at his peak. So I have a little bit of concern, relatively speaking.
Yeah, and just all the injury history with that guy too. I mean, Rodon is somebody who'd be very difficult for me to draft. I'd rather take a younger pitcher who hasn't been through the ringer as much and still probably has similar upside. A few guys moving down for me, Blake Snell and Jordan Montgomery are going to sign eventually. And I know Snell won the Cy Young, and strange Cy Young because he didn't lead the majors in walks. I mean, but he won the Cy Young anyway. Nolan Ryan never did that. He did the first thing, not the second thing. But with Snell and Montgomery not signed, eventually they're going to join a team and have to move and do without the adjustment and the pressure. And I had to come down way significantly on not just their innings, but what I think the effectiveness will be. And in all the drafts I'm in, somebody still drafts them like they're going to sign tomorrow and be their, 90% of their full self. That's not going to be me. And another player who's moved down for me in the spring, look, Mike Trout, he has 2 walks and 16 strikeouts because he's Mike Trout. It's not like the veteran players, they're getting their reps in. I mean, you don't really worry about that so much. But with Trout, I've come across some data of just people talking about how much he doesn't handle the high fastball anymore. He still cripples the low fastball, but pitches at the belt and above that he used to absolutely obliterate. They strike him out now. I just don't think Trout's going to hit 25 or 30 home runs. He's going to play a partial season. We know he's probably done running, even though Ron Washington has talked about that team being a track team. But
he stole a base the other day. There's one.
Yeah, there you go. Here it comes. Yeah, I hope you win your spring training league because of Mike Trout stolen base. But he's just I'm shocked the market is only giving you the slightest. He's still a top 50 player in Yahoo ADP. I think that's ludicrous. I will not draft Mike Trout. And not only why not draft him, Eric, I can't believe I'm saying this, and this will get thrown in my face on social media all year if I'm wrong on it. I'm not afraid of Mike Trout beating me. I think he'll be good when he plays. Not great, but good. And he'll be good for 115 games. And you'll get your 27 homers, decent RBI, some runs. He'll hit 265. He'll steal 3 bases. So what? I don't want Mike Trout in the top 50. I think him in the top 50 is ludicrous.
Yeah, projections are still really high on Mike Trout, and I think that is also just taking into account that the projected plate appearances right now are way up there. ATC and the Bat both have him for over 540 plate appearances, which is something he hasn't done since 2019. So I do think, like, if you're looking at projections,
and I love those guys. I love Ariel Cohen. I think Derek Carty's one of the smartest people in the industry, but I just can't agree with that at all.
Yeah. And I think you just need to adjust that on your own. Like, what is your threshold? What do you think he's going to do? And so for me, I haven't gotten any shares of Mike Trout. I'm not opposed to it, but I feel like he's going to play fewer games. And
I'm
so
opposed to it.
I just don't have him by the time he goes. My last faller, it's just sad as Red Sox fans. But this is also not a knock on him.
Pick on the Red Sox.
It's Wilyer Abreu.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, listen, some of the consequence of a riser is that there has to be a faller in some way. Abreu, I think, is still a solid player. I think Abreu probably, always profiled better as like a fourth outfielder, left-handed hitter off the bench, things like that. Again, he's only 24, so there is room for him to grow. He has had a rough spring, and Ceddanne Rafaela has had a great spring. And so if Rafaela plays center field, you also need to find at-bats for Jarren Duran and Tyler O'Neill and Masataka Yoshida. And what we've seen over the last couple of days is the Red Sox playing Tyler O'Neill more in right field, where they were not playing him at the start of spring training, and playing Jarren Duran in left with Yoshida DHing. And I really do think that's kind of how you're going to see it play out at the beginning of the year. And Abreu and O'Neill could split at bats in right field. O'Neill has not been the picture of health himself, is dealing with some calf tightness right now, so that could give at bats to Abreu. But I think we went into spring thinking Abreu had a shot to be an everyday player, and I don't see that anymore. And so as I'm boosting Ceddanne Rafaela up, I'm dropping Wilyer Abreu down. The other flip side of that is like I'm not drafting Jordan Westburg. I know that he may start the year in the Orioles infield, and I know he's like a young guy, and so it's like the same thing of like, oh, it's a trendy prospect. But like, to me, Jackson Holliday and Kobe Mayo are just objectively better and playing better, and I just think it's only a matter of time before that infield is Gunnar Henderson and Holliday and Mayo. And so I can't take shares of Jordan Westburg right now. And so that's kind of like the flip side of those risers for me. I don't know who are your fallers to wrap this up.
Yeah, to wrap it up, Tanner Scott lost me a few weeks ago with that massive fail against the Yankees. He walked like 4 guys. I think for the spring he's got 7 walks, 4 strikeouts, and you will take years off your manager's life when you can't find the plate in the 9th inning. I think eventually he'll lose that closer job. And just to put a period on the Trout discussion, when you're drafting Trout or not drafting Trout, that's when Cody Bellinger goes. Maybe a half round later to a round later, you can get Christian Yelich, a boring value vet. And I meant to mention Jazz Chisholm on my risers. Neil McDonald's Jazz Chisholm, right? If he can get even 140 games, you're getting 30 out of that guy. So Jazz Chisholm is somebody who I'm proactively drafting. And I'm also going to include Nolan Jones on my fallers. And this is more of me catching up to the data than maybe anything he's done in the last month. But his BABIP last year, especially in road games, was just so much of an outlier. It has to fall. And this is the most depressing Colorado lineup I can remember. We've talked about that during the spring. I don't want to draft Chris Bryant. This lineup just scares me. I think what Nolan Jones did last year, I think he's still a quality player, but I don't think it's anywhere near repeatable. Now, sometimes there's a certain type of player who comes out of nowhere, has a big season, and the market believes in him. I think that's Nolan Jones. And then you take Lane Thomas, who had a great season. He was a top 10 outfielder, and the market says, no, I don't believe in Lane Thomas. I'm actually drafting Lane Thomas because I can get him as like the outfielder 25 or the outfielder 28, where he can regress a fair amount and still return a profit. I think the market is saying Nolan Jones needs to keep most of his stats from last year to justify his current ADP, and I think he's going to have trouble doing that.
Yeah, I am more interested in Nolan Jones. I believe in Nolan Jones. I think it's sad that I just, I can't do the Chris Bryant thing anymore.
Very sad. You would think he's 38.
Yes, I hope
young 30s.
I fully hope he is a early waiver wire ad. He looks healthy. He looks good. He's in Coors and everybody, runs to pick him up. I think you'll probably eventually deal with an injury and have to, move on. But, it'd be nice to see a little bit of improvement for him, some health for him.
Let me say one more thing before we close this show. Okay, I'm gonna give you a swing thought. You're going into your draft. You want a swing thought. Draft anybody from the Seattle pitching staff. Anybody. Especially their starters.
And their
you like their closer too.
I'm big on Andres Munoz.
Yes, you are. So there you go. Get their starters, get their closer, and
just get them all.
Repeat until rich.
Yes, I fully agree. So Scott and I are going to continue. We got another podcast coming later this week. We are going to continue to get you ready for the regular season. We are going to bring on some of our NBC Sports betting analysts. We're going to talk about some baseball bets that you can place prior to regular season. We are going to have baseball by the time we're recording our next podcast. We'll get to actually look at maybe the first game and talk a little bit about some takeaways there. Again, you can follow Scott and I on Twitter for all of our content. You can follow me at Samski NYC. You can follow Scott at Scott_Pianowski. And we'll be back for another episode of the Rotoworld Baseball Show.